I sat still at the edge of the birthday table, a crooked candle flickering in front of me when my son raised his glass and said, "Don't waste cake on her." His friends laughed like it was a roast, not a celebration. My slice sat untouched, just like me. After raising him alone, after paying his rent, after saving every insult in silence, he reduced me to a joke over dessert. That night I smiled. Then I started cutting. Not the cake, the future. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The laughter didn't match the occasion. It came too sharp, too loud from the next table over. Mark's co-workers huddled around 2-for-1 margaritas like it was their payday, not her birthday. Eleanor sat at the end of the long booth in a pressed navy blouse, hands folded neatly in her lap, ankles crossed like she'd taught her students for decades. Then came the cake. The waiter emerged from the kitchen holding it high, a round chocolate confection with slanted white frosting and a crooked number 72 candle flickering proudly. It smelled of cheap vanilla and store-brand sugar, but Eleanor smiled anyway. She always appreciated effort, even if the cake looked like it came from the supermarket freezer aisle. Everyone clapped politely, Claire barely lifting her fingers, her phone already back in her palm. Sophie, seated beside Eleanor, offered a soft cheer and a side hug. It meant the world. Mark stood, fork raised like a champagne flute, eyes gleaming with smug performance. He cleared his throat and said, all right, settle down." Toast time, the table quieted, and Eleanor instinctively straightened her back. "Here's to my mother," he began, glancing sideways at the waiter now slicing the cake behind them. Still kicking at 72, still wearing the same flat since the Bush administration, his friends burst into cackles. Eleanor kept smiling. He wasn't done. "Don't waste cake on her," he added, loud and sharp, voice riding high on cheap tequila and inflated ego. "She won't finish it anyway." Probably still hoarding crumbs in her purse from last year, laughter erupted. From his co-workers, from Claire, even from the waiter who hesitated mid-slice. The knife tapped against the plate like a bell Eleanor couldn't unhear. Her hands tightened around her napkin. She glanced at Janet, seated across the booth. Janet's eyes narrowed just slightly, her lips pressed in a firm line. A moment later, Eleanor's phone buzzed in her cardigan pocket. She checked it under the table. Janet, document it. Across the table, Claire chuckled as she took a picture of the cake. "She'll eat one bite and save the rest for next week's breakfast," she said, scrolling through filters like Eleanor wasn't sitting 2 feet away. Eleanor's eyes landed on Sophie. Her granddaughter didn't laugh, didn't even smile. She sat still, her lips parted slightly, her cheeks flushed, not with embarrassment for herself, but for Eleanor. Her fork scraped against her untouched plate. The waiter finally placed a slice of cake in front of Eleanor, overly polite now, tone compensating for the moment. "Here you go, ma'am." Birthday girl gets the first piece. Eleanor looked at it. Chocolate. Just how she used to make it for Mark when he was 10 and still kind. She picked up the knife slowly, her wrist aching just a little from age, and cut into the slice like she was dissecting something sacred. Not rushed, not flustered. Just precise. Controlled. "You want to say something, Mom?" Mark said, drumming his fingers on the table. Some of your classic life wisdom. She didn't answer. Instead, she set down the knife, placed the smallest corner of the cake on her plate, and calmly dabbed her mouth with her napkin. Her smile returned. Not wide, not generous, but tight, deliberate. The kind of smile that closed doors. The table returned to chatter, birthday over before it even began. Mark clinked his glass with Claire, already talking about a work presentation. Someone brought up a golf trip. Nobody looked back at Eleanor, except Sophie. When the bill came, Eleanor instinctively reached for her purse, old habits from decades of putting others first. But Janet placed a hand over hers. "I've got it," she said, voice low. "Just remember tonight. That's all I ask outside. The parking lot buzzed with neon signs and car alarms. The air smelled of exhaust and leftover grease. Eleanor moved slowly toward her car, the to-go container in her hand warm but hollow. As they reached the passenger door, Sophie pulled gently on her sleeve. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it sliced clean through the evening haze. "Grandma, I'm so sorry." The cake was still warm when Eleanor stepped into her kitchen, the silence pressing against her like a weighted coat. The laughter from the restaurant still echoed somewhere in her ribs, faint but sharp, like the aftershock of a bruise not yet fully formed. She placed the small to-go container on the counter and stood there, staring at it like it might talk back. Her hands moved automatically, knife, foil, Sharpie. The kitchen light hummed above her, casting yellow on linoleum that hadn't seen a renovation in decades. She opened the container. The chocolate cake had shifted during the drive, smudging the lid. Eleanor took the tiniest corner and sliced it with the kind of care one might give a relic. Then she wrapped it, tight and clean. On the foil, in her neat teacher's script, she wrote, "August 25th, birthday. Insult." She placed it at the back of the freezer, behind a frozen bag of peas and an unlabeled soup container, sealing it away like evidence. Across the living room, her phone buzzed. A notification from Facebook lit up the screen. She didn't check it right away. The last thing she wanted was more noise. But curiosity and habit won. She opened the app. There he was, Mark, smirking into the camera with a selfie from dinner, her sliver of cake barely visible at the edge of the frame. Caption: "Retiree chic." "She's still kicking, folks." Her thumb hovered, then scrolled. Claire had commented underneath. She ate one bite, wasteful as always. Eleanor's breath caught for a moment. Not hurt, just something colder. Not anger either, just clarity. Across the hall, the hardwood creaked gently. Sophie emerged from the guest room where she was staying the weekend, her flannel pajama pants dragging just slightly. She didn't say anything at first, just walked over and stood beside her grandmother, reading the post silently. Then, without a word, Sophie took her phone out and captured a screenshot. 1, 2, she even got the timestamp. Eleanor said nothing, but their eyes met. "Just in case," Sophie whispered. Eleanor nodded, grateful beyond words that the girl knew what just in case really meant. By morning, the cake had become a non-topic, buried under new distractions. But Eleanor moved through her Sunday with intent. She pulled out the red binder she hadn't opened in months, the one labeled Estate and Emergency. It sat beside her cup of lukewarm coffee like a sleeping animal. At noon, Janet called. "I couldn't sleep," Janet said, voice sharper than usual. "I keep seeing that smirk on his face." Eleanor didn't need to ask which one. "I've started notes," she replied calmly. "I saved the slice." "Good," Janet said, her tone brightening just slightly. "Cake today, inheritance tomorrow. That's how they learn. Start writing it down, Elle." Every bite they steal, Eleanor hung up and returned to her binder. She added a new tab. Mark, Incidents. She tucked the foil photo underneath the first sheet, then flipped to the section on joint accounts. Out of habit, she logged into her online banking to reconcile her monthly spreadsheet. She always did it around this time, marking off each payment with a yellow highlighter and keeping track of the grocery and utility spends. But today, something didn't match. $600. Gone. She stared at the transaction. Home supplies, modern nest interiors. Not Walmart, not Target. Not anything she would ever shop from. Her eyes narrowed. She clicked on the merchant ID. It was a boutique furniture and decor store, Claire's favorite. Eleanor had seen the receipts on her kitchen counter before when she visited the house. Tall vases and overpriced throw blankets she couldn't imagine using. Her fingers trembled, not from age, but restraint. The account was a joint one. It always had been. She'd added Mark years ago, back when he was between jobs and needed a little help floating until the bonus came through. No notice, no request. Just quiet subtraction. She set her hands flat on the table, the paper warm beneath her palms from the heat of her body. There it was. Again clarity, sharper than disappointment, louder than insult, not a mistake, a message. And she heard it loud and clear. Eleanor sat at the kitchen table long after the sun moved past the blinds, casting uneven stripes across the red binder at her elbow. The screen in front of her had already gone dim, but the number glowed in her head like it had been carved there. $603.88. She didn't need to click the merchant again. She recognized the name immediately. Modern Nest Interiors, Claire's boutique of choice. Clean white spaces, gold accents, pretentious slogans on reclaimed wood. Claire once called it aspirational decor. Eleanor called it unnecessary. She folded her hands on the table, fingertips steady now. Her emotions had hardened into something else. Not fury, not even betrayal. Something far more dangerous. Clarity. The call came mid-morning. Mark's name lit up her screen like a warning. She answered without a greeting. "Hey," he said, chipper. "Saw a fraud alert on the account. Oh wait, never mind. That was us." Eleanor didn't move. "You used my money." "It's a joint account, Mom." His tone snapped from innocent to irritated. "I told Claire to order a few pieces for the house." "Nothing crazy. I didn't authorize that." "Well, I didn't think we needed a whole board meeting for a couple of home upgrades." "You have the money, and honestly, you should be thanking me. It makes the whole place more welcoming." "For who?" Her voice came quiet but cold. "Not for me," he scoffed. "Look, you've had your savings sitting there for years. You live in a paid-off house, you've got Social Security, and no real expenses. What's the big deal?" "It's not the amount," she said. "It's the assumption." There was a pause. Then came his shrug, practically audible through the phone. "Consider it rent for staying alive." Sophie, passing through the hallway, froze mid-step. Her eyes met Eleanor's, alarmed. "That's not fair, Dad," she called out before Eleanor could stop her. "Grandma didn't agree to that." Mark's voice turned sharp. "Sophie, stay out of this. This is between grown-ups." Eleanor hung up. Not abruptly, not angrily, just with intention, like putting down a book that no longer deserved her time. She went back to the kitchen, printed the digital receipt, and filed it behind the other documents. Facebook screenshots, birthday photos, and now the boutique invoice. Each sheet of paper was another thread in a net she was weaving, slowly and methodically. And when it closed, it would hold. She added a sticky note. Unauthorized withdrawal. No discussion. Mark's response, "Consider it rent." Initialed and dated. By mid-afternoon, the silence of the house was broken by Janet's arrival. She came in through the back, as she always did, with a cold Snapple in one hand and her usual no-nonsense attitude in the other. "I brought you crosswords and legal advice," Janet announced, dropping her purse by the door. "The fun kind." Eleanor gestured toward the binder. "He took over $600 for a vase and throw blanket." Janet leaned over the table and read the receipt. "From Modern Nest? That place charges $80 for a candle." Eleanor nodded. Janet sat, folding her arms. "That wasn't a purchase. That was a test. And now you know how far he'll go." "I'm starting to." Janet tapped the binder. "This is more than a paper trail now. This is your defense. You ready to do something with it?" Eleanor didn't hesitate. "I'm ready." That night, after dinner, Sophie handed her a Post-it with a list of contacts. "In case you need a new phone plan," she said softly. "Just in case." Eleanor furrowed her brow. "Why would I need—" Before she finished, her cell buzzed. A new notification. "You've been removed from the Price family shared phone plan. Service may be interrupted." Eleanor blinked once, then slowly her shoulders straightened. No cake, no cash, no contact. They weren't just erasing her from their lives. They were daring her to notice. And now she had. The moment her cell lost signal in the middle of Sophie's sentence, Eleanor didn't panic. She stood quietly in her kitchen, the silence almost reverent. Her hands didn't shake, her pulse didn't race, but something shifted, like a pressure valve inside her had been released. She didn't redial, she didn't text. She walked straight to her bedroom, opened the desk drawer, and retrieved a business card she had tucked away months ago, back when Janet warned her this might be coming. Daniel Wu, Esquire, Elder Law and Estate Planning. Printed clean. Simple serif font. Stockton address. Direct line. She dialed. The receptionist answered, chirpy and polite, but Eleanor's voice came steady and cold. "My name is Eleanor Price. I'd like to schedule a consultation with Mr. Wu. It's urgent." The woman hesitated, briefly, then replied, "He has an opening tomorrow at 10. Will that work?" Eleanor didn't flinch. "It will." The next morning, she wore a pressed gray blouse and the same pearl earrings she used to wear during parent-teacher conferences, back when her words had weight. The estate law office sat between a dentist and a tax prep storefront in a beige strip mall, but inside, it was calm and immaculate. A soft scent of cedar floated through the air. She checked in at the front. Binder clutched tightly in one arm. Her name was called within 5 minutes. Daniel Wu rose from behind a heavy walnut desk and offered a polite but cautious smile. Late 40s, maybe 50, with dark eyes that missed nothing and a quiet stillness that made Eleanor feel oddly safe. "Mrs. Price," he said, gesturing to a leather chair. "How can I help?" She opened the red binder without a word. First came the photo of the birthday cake, still in foil. Then the Facebook screenshot, the boutique receipt, the phone plan notification. Each sheet landed on the desk like a card in a high-stakes game. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and clear. "My son publicly humiliated me on my birthday. Days earlier, he used my joint account to spend over $600 on luxury items for his wife. When I questioned him, he told me to consider it rent for staying alive. Then he removed me from the family's phone plan. No discussion, no apology. Daniel didn't interrupt. He flipped through each page slowly, eyes focused, pen tapping lightly against his palm. "I'm not here because of one insult," Eleanor continued. "I'm here because of a pattern. He takes without asking, spends without guilt, and now he wants control." Daniel set the papers down and leaned forward. "Mrs. Price, you're not powerless. You're holding the pen. You're not here to ask for permission. You're here to make decisions." For the first time in days, Eleanor exhaled, deeply. Janet, seated behind her, cracked a smile. "Told you." Every slice accounted for. Daniel nodded at the binder. "This documentation is gold. Most people come in here with nothing but hurt feelings. You brought evidence, structure, and intent. That makes all the difference." Eleanor lifted her chin. "I've been organized my whole life. I'm not about to stop now." He opened a folder and pulled out a fresh estate planning worksheet. "Then let's get to it. I'd recommend revising your entire estate plan. Remove anyone you don't trust. Consider a trust instead of a standard will. It offers more control and protection, especially with the kind of behavior you're describing." Eleanor's voice didn't waver. "My granddaughter is the only one who sees me clearly. I want to protect her future, and I want to make sure Mark can't touch a single cent." Daniel gave a small, approving nod. "We'll lock it down tight. And we'll include a no contest clause. If he tries to challenge it, he gets nothing." Janet leaned in. "That's the legal version of flipping the cake." Eleanor signed the intent to revise form, her name flowing clean across the page. There was no hesitation, no regret. Daniel slid the paper into a manila envelope and said, "Now, we begin." And with that stroke of ink, Eleanor didn't just rewrite her will, she rewrote the ending. The pen felt heavier than it should have. Eleanor stared at the line where her signature belonged, the paper impossibly crisp beneath her hand. She had signed thousands of things in her life, permission slips, grade reports, mortgage renewals, but none of them had ever tasted this final. Across the desk, Daniel Wu slid a fresh copy toward her. Initial here, then here. This makes the revocation official. Eleanor gripped the pen. Her fingers didn't shake. Not today. She drew her initials in black ink beside her old will's cancellation, then signed the bottom line. Just like that, Mark and Claire were gone. No more claims to her house. No more access to her money. No voice at the table when she was gone. The weight of 30 years of compromise lifted like fog in morning sun. Daniel leaned back. We'll establish the new trust today. Sophie will be the sole beneficiary, but locked until she's 25, Eleanor clarified. No temptation, no pressure. I want her to grow into it, not drown under it. Smart, Daniel replied. You're thinking like a legacy builder, not just a grantor. Eleanor's eyes didn't leave the page. She's the only one who ever looked at me without wanting something. He nodded solemnly. You're protecting her from them even after you're gone. Janet, sitting quietly in the corner with a Diet Coke and her sunglasses pushed up like a crown, chuckled under her breath. That's how you frost the cake. Eleanor smiled. Not big, but real. The first smile in days that didn't feel rehearsed. Daniel continued, flipping to a new section. We're also adding your charitable clauses. 5% of the estate goes to the Stockton Public Library Foundation. 3% to the Senior Center's Meals and Wellness Program. Make it 5 each, Eleanor said before he could finish. I want those rooms to stay open even if mine closes. Daniel's pen scratched a revision. Done. Next came the no contest clause. If Mark tries to fight this, Daniel explained, he forfeits any rights, even if he somehow found a loophole. It's ironclad. Good, Eleanor said. Let him test it. Just once, by early afternoon, they were at a notary's office tucked behind a dull strip of insurance agencies and a vape shop. The fluorescent lights buzzed, the carpet smelled faintly of Windex, and the clerk who witnessed Eleanor's signature had a tattoo of a koi fish peeking out from her sleeve. Still, the moment felt holy. Each notarized copy sealed a chapter Mark didn't even know had been written. Back in the car, Janet rolled down the window and let the breeze in. How do you feel? Not angry, Eleanor said. Just precise. That night, she tucked the new documents into her fireproof box and slipped a copy into her bank deposit locker. Sophie didn't know yet. She would in time, when she was ready. For now, it was Eleanor's secret to hold, like a pocket knife in velvet lining, soft to the innocent, sharp to the careless. She didn't text Mark, didn't gloat, didn't warn. But across town, Mark was already discovering the shift. He stood at the self-checkout of a high-end home improvement store, swiping a sleek new smart thermostat and a designer lighting fixture. The total blinked, $812.94. He inserted the card, her card, the one he'd always used. Declined. He frowned, tried again. Same result. He glanced at Claire, who was flipping through swatches nearby, blissfully unaware. Let me try the other one, he muttered, pulling out a backup card connected to the same joint account. Declined. A red notification flashed across the screen. Account access restricted. Cardholder authorization required. Mark stood there, heat crawling up his neck, the cashier already glancing over like he was a kid caught shoplifting. He pulled out his phone and opened the banking app. 2 attempts to transfer from the joint savings. Blocked. Then a message. For account changes or authorization, please contact Eleanor Price directly. He stood frozen, hands tightening around his phone, like he could force the digits back into his control. But the numbers didn't move, and neither did the line. The banker's pen clicked with a satisfying snap, the sound sharp against the hush of the downtown branch office. Eleanor sat across from him in a blazer she hadn't worn in years, one with a threadbare cuff and a tiny ink mark near the hem. But today, it felt like armor. Do you want your new account completely private or just restricted? The banker asked, glancing between Eleanor and the red binder in her lap. Private, she replied. No linked cards, no joint holders, no online access except mine. The banker gave a small, respectful nod. We can do that. Eleanor passed him a folder labeled Accounts to Move. Inside were direct deposit forms, benefit reroute letters, and notes with exact routing instructions. Her pension, her social security, her annuity, every stream of income that had quietly fed the account Mark used to think of as his personal river. It would now flow somewhere else, somewhere silent, somewhere safe. By the time she left the bank, Eleanor had transferred everything. She'd even called the utility companies to reassign. Auto pay cards. The clerk at PG&E had asked, "Would you like to leave the other card as backup?" And Eleanor had answered with a simple, "No." Outside, the air was hot and dry, typical for Stockton in late August. But Eleanor felt oddly weightless, like she'd slipped out of a skin she never agreed to wear. By the time Mark noticed, it was nearly midnight. She was curled on the couch in her robe, reading a dog-eared novel, when her phone lit up. Mark Price, 2 missed calls. Mark Price, voicemail received. She didn't check the message. She didn't need to. A few seconds later, her landline rang. "Mom, what did you do?" His voice was breathless, angry. "I just tried to pay the insurance and the card bounced. I checked the bank. What happened to the savings? What happened to the auto payments?" Eleanor stood and walked slowly into the kitchen, phone still pressed to her ear. "I took my slice back. You can't just shut me out. I didn't shut you out." "You were never invited in to begin with," he scoffed. "Oh, so now you're being dramatic." There was a shuffling noise in the background. Claire's voice came faintly through the line. "She's acting unstable, Mark." "This isn't normal behavior." Eleanor pressed the phone closer. "Claire, you're on speaker. You might want to be careful what you say." Claire didn't skip a beat. "I said what I meant." "Good," Eleanor replied. "Then we understand each other." Mark exhaled hard. "You're messing with things you don't even understand. You think this is about money?" "No," she said softly. "It's about respect. And you lost mine the moment you laughed while I sat there cutting my own birthday cake." The silence on the other end was loud. She hung up before either of them could respond. In the hallway, Eleanor noticed a shadow moving near Sophie's room. The door was slightly ajar. A moment later, Sophie stepped into view, her expression unreadable. She held her phone in one hand, screen still lit up. "I heard them," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry you had to," Eleanor said. Sophie shook her head. "You need to know, they were talking before dinner tonight, in the kitchen. They didn't see me, but they said something about guardianship papers." Eleanor blinked. "They're planning something," Sophie added. "Claire said if you're cutting them off financially, it might be time to have you declared incompetent." The room didn't spin. Eleanor didn't tremble. She just turned and walked back to the living room, pulled the red binder from the drawer, and flipped to a blank page. In black ink, she wrote, "Attempted financial retaliation. Guardianship threat overheard by Sophie. Begin defense prep." She dated it, signed her initials, and closed the binder. If they wanted to declare her unfit, they'd need more than whispers in the kitchen. They'd need to prove it, and Eleanor had already started her defense. The envelope arrived on a Wednesday morning, pale blue and too thick to be casual. It had weight, legal weight, and Eleanor didn't need to open it to know what it was, but she opened it anyway. Inside, she found her son's signature beneath a formal guardianship petition, claiming she was increasingly confused, emotionally unstable, and financially erratic. The words were printed in sterile type, but Eleanor could still hear his voice behind them, convinced, smug, rehearsed. She sat very still. The air smelled faintly of lemons. She'd just wiped down the kitchen counter, and a pot of lentil soup simmered quietly behind her. Sophie had left for school an hour ago. The binder sat open on the table. She reached for it automatically and began documenting. Received guardianship petition. Language indicates intent to seize financial control. Allegation, unstable. She dated it and signed the bottom, then made one call. Daniel picked up on the second ring. "I was expecting this." "He actually filed," Eleanor said calmly. "Incompetent, unfit, that I'm losing touch." "He's going to lose more than that," Daniel replied. "We're going to counter with a capacity evaluation. Clean, Court ordered. I'll expedite it. That Friday, the evaluation took place in Daniel's conference room. A court-appointed geriatric psychologist arrived in a charcoal blazer, clipboard in hand, expression unreadable. She asked Eleanor to complete a series of memory, reasoning, and orientation tasks. Nothing Eleanor hadn't done in the classroom 100 times before with her students. She answered every question, solved every problem, and quoted full lines from a poem she'd taught for 20 years. She didn't do it to impress the doctor. She did it because she was capable, and because they needed to know it. The psychologist packed up after an hour, gave her a firm handshake, and told Daniel, "You'll have my report within 48 hours. 2 days later, the ruling came back. Mentally competent. No evidence of cognitive decline. No indication of vulnerability. The court date arrived the following week. Eleanor entered the small Stockton County courtroom, wearing a navy skirt suit and silver clip-on earrings. Her hair was brushed and pinned. Janet sat beside her in the gallery, lips tight, arms crossed. Daniel stood tall at her side, briefcase in hand. Mark looked freshly shaved and artificially solemn, dressed in a blazer Eleanor had paid for years ago. Claire was next to him, hiding behind dark glasses like a movie villain trying not to be recognized at the mall. The judge reviewed the evidence in silence. Daniel handed over the evaluation report. Then he submitted the binder, meticulously ordered, every incident logged, receipts attached, and timelines highlighted. Sophie's screenshots, the phone plan notice, the cake photo, and finally, the capacity clearance signed by the court-appointed doctor. Mark shifted in his seat, sweating visibly. Claire whispered something, and he flinched. Daniel didn't say much. He didn't need to. Facts did the speaking. The judge glanced between them all before closing the folder with finality. "There's no legal basis for guardianship," she said. "The petitioner has provided no credible evidence of impairment." Case dismissed. Claire stood abruptly, grabbing her bag. Mark's face flushed, his jaw tight as though he might protest, but he didn't. Eleanor didn't look at him, not once. Outside, Sophie rushed to her side, still in her school uniform. "I told the truth," she said, voice cracking just slightly, to the evaluator. "I said everything I saw." Eleanor placed a hand on her shoulder. "That's all I ever needed." Janet gave a low whistle. "That's checkmate, Elle. No way back from that one." They went home in quiet relief, the car windows down, a breeze cutting through the late summer heat. When Eleanor stepped into the house, something felt lighter until she walked into her bedroom. She paused. Her jewelry box sat slightly off-center on the dresser. She approached it slowly, heart sinking. The lid was open. Inside, the top layer was empty. Gone. Her mother's wedding band. The sapphire brooch. A pair of pearl studs Mark gave her years ago, before all this. Eleanor didn't scream, didn't touch a thing. Gone, too, was the sapphire brooch her father gave her when she got her teaching credential. The pair of pearl studs from her first anniversary. Even the tiny locket with Sophie's baby photo inside. Ripped from the bottom drawer, chain and all. Eleanor's breath slowed. Not out of fear, out of calculation. She didn't move the box, didn't tidy it. Instead, she pulled out her phone, snapped 3 clear photos from multiple angles, and then walked to the kitchen. The binder was waiting, red and steady. She flipped to a fresh tab. Theft, physical property. Wrote, jewelry box discovered disturbed post-guardianship hearing. Multiple heirlooms missing. Last verified, 4 weeks ago. Drawer undisturbed. No forced entry. She stapled the photos and closed the cover. By noon, Janet was on the couch with a glass of Diet Cola and eyes sharper than usual. Eleanor explained everything in under a minute. Janet didn't blink. "I'd bet every last can in my pantry it was Claire," she said. Eleanor nodded once. "I have a feeling." It wasn't until the next morning, when Sophie returned from school, that the final piece dropped. Eleanor was in the sunroom, pruning her spider plant. When Sophie appeared in the doorway, her brow furrowed. "Grandma, I think I saw something I shouldn't have. Eleanor set the scissors down. Go on, Sophie hesitated. Last weekend, I was helping Mom clean out her bag. She asked me to look for her migraine pills. I found a receipt tucked in the side pocket. She yanked it away before I could really read it, but I saw the name. Stockton Pawn and Gold. The address was on Pacific Avenue, and it had a ring drawn next to it. Eleanor stood still. Sophie's voice dropped. It looked like the kind you kept in the box. They didn't speak for a long beat. Then Eleanor said, "Thank you for telling me." She called Daniel within the hour. "I need to file a police report," she said. She emailed him the binder scans, the photos, and Sophie's statement. Daniel replied within 10 minutes, already drafting the theft affidavit. "I'll have PD looped in by this afternoon." 2 days later, a uniformed officer stood at her doorstep. His name was Officer Mendez, calm-voiced and direct. He took her statement, examined the binder, and asked clear, professional questions. "Do you believe you know who took the items?" Eleanor didn't pause. "Yes, Claire Price, my son's wife. Do you know where they might be?" Eleanor gave him the pawn shop's name and address. By the end of the week, she got a call from Officer Mendez. "Miss Price," he said. "We served a retrieval order at Stockton Pawn and Gold this morning. The shop still had the items. They're holding them for evidence processing, but they'll be returned to you as soon as clearance is granted." Eleanor let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. He added, "We'll be moving forward with a misdemeanor theft citation. The evidence is sufficient." That evening, Janet dropped by with a peach pie and a look that said, "Tell me everything." Eleanor handed her the police printout. Janet read it, shook her head, and muttered, "Even cake thieves choke on stones." They sat in silence for a while, the kitchen warm from the oven, the scent of pastry mingling with lemon oil on the counter. Then the doorbell rang. Eleanor opened it to find Claire standing stiffly on the front step, sunglasses on despite the dusk. Behind her, a police cruiser idled at the curb. Officer Mendez stepped forward. "Claire Price," he said, "we're serving you with notice of misdemeanor theft. You'll need to appear at the courthouse within the next 30 days. Claire's mouth opened, but no sound came. Eleanor didn't say a word. She simply stepped aside as the consequences walked through the door. The courthouse smelled like old carpet and tension. Eleanor walked through the metal detector with her red binder cradled in her arms like a weapon. Janet walked beside her, silent for once, her jaw tight. Daniel met them near the courtroom doors, tie straight, expression sharper than usual. "Claire's bringing a private attorney," he said under his breath. "Mark is representing himself." "Of course he is," Eleanor replied, scanning the corridor. "Why pay a lawyer when you think you own the truth?" Inside, the room was too cold. Overhead fluorescents buzzed faintly as the bailiff called the case number. Claire sat stiff in her chair, mascara hiding the shadows under her eyes. Mark slouched at the defendant's table, a stack of printouts in front of him that he hadn't bothered to organize. The judge, a woman in her early 60s with silver-streaked hair and a deliberate way of speaking, reviewed the docket aloud. "Miss Eleanor Price versus Mark Price and Claire Price. Charges: attempted financial exploitation of a senior, misuse of shared funds, and theft of personal property." Mark raised a hand, already impatient. "Your Honor, this is a family dispute, not a criminal matter." The judge raised a brow. "That's for me to decide." Daniel stood, calm and deliberate. "Your Honor, this case isn't about a misunderstanding. It's about a documented pattern: coercion, unauthorized financial activity, deliberate humiliation, and finally, physical theft. My client has kept extensive records. Everything is logged, time-stamped, and backed by witnesses." He laid the binder on the table, opened it slowly. The courtroom projector lit up behind him. First came the screenshot of Mark's birthday toast post. "Retiree chic." Then the boutique receipt for the $603 unauthorized home goods purchase. The phone plan removal. Guardianship threats. Then the police report detailing Claire's theft, with a notarized statement from the pawn shop. Last, Daniel handed the judge a sealed affidavit from Sophie. She provided this independently, Your Honor. Testimony of what she witnessed firsthand: her father's behavior, her mother's actions, the planning of a guardianship petition while Miss Price remained fully competent. The judge skimmed the affidavit. Her expression hardened. Claire's lawyer whispered something to her, but Claire didn't respond. She sat like glass, rigid and cracking. Mark stood suddenly. This is character assassination. My mother is twisting everything. She's unstable. She changed all the accounts, locked me out. You stole from her, Daniel interjected. Mark slammed his hand on the table. She's senile. The courtroom froze. The judge looked up. I read the cognitive evaluation. She's not. Mark's face reddened. She's vindictive. Daniel didn't flinch. She's protected. The judge looked to Eleanor. Miss Price, would you like to say anything before I rule? Eleanor rose slowly. No speech, no dramatics. She stood with both hands on the table, steady. I was humiliated at a birthday dinner meant to celebrate my life. I was mocked in front of strangers, used as a punchline, while my money was being spent without my consent. When I questioned it, I was told I owed them rent for staying alive. She paused, glancing toward Mark, whose eyes narrowed. I brought the cake. They took the knife. So I picked it up. She faced the judge again. He cut me out of cake. I cut him out of my will. Daniel said nothing. He didn't have to. The truth had already spoken. The judge adjusted her glasses. The evidence shows a clear pattern of exploitation. The financial control, the attempt to gain guardianship, the theft of heirlooms, these are not isolated incidents. They are coordinated acts of abuse. She banged the gavel. Temporary restraining order granted. Mark and Claire Price are not to contact Eleanor Price directly or indirectly. Any attempt to interfere with her finances, health, or residence will result in further criminal charges. Claire exhaled like she'd been punched. Mark shot to his feet. I'll appeal this. You don't get to erase your son. Eleanor didn't look at him. She gathered her binder, tucked it under her arm, and walked out of the courtroom like she was closing the final chapter of a book she never wanted to write. But the story wasn't finished. Not yet. Eleanor was stirring sugar into her coffee when her phone buzzed. A soft vibration on the countertop, barely a sound. But somehow it rang louder than a door slamming. The subject line was cold and bureaucratic. Notice of appeal. Price versus Price. She read it twice. Then she set the spoon down and calmly reached for her glasses. The email attached Mark's latest move, a formal appeal of the court's restraining order, claiming judicial bias and mischaracterization of familial dynamics. He framed it as a misunderstanding between generations, a mother not in her right mind, a son concerned for her well-being. He hadn't even spelled her middle name correctly in the affidavit. She forwarded it to Daniel with a single line. I assume we're ready? His reply came minutes later. Already waiting. In court the following week, Eleanor sat quietly in the gallery while Daniel addressed the judge. A different one this time, more reserved, with a sharper jawline and no patience for nonsense. The courtroom felt colder. The walls were the same dull beige, but the mood had shifted. This wasn't a trial, it was cleanup. Mark stood alone again, Claire notably absent, and read from a stack of notes he had clearly prepared in haste. I'm just trying to reconnect with my mother, he said, eyes flicking up toward the judge. This entire situation has spiraled out of control. I believe the prior ruling was influenced by emotion and lacked proper context. He spoke of misunderstandings, generational confusion, the pressures of caring for an aging parent. His voice was polished now, measured. He'd traded the arrogance for performative concern, but nothing about it felt real. Daniel remained seated until the judge prompted a response. He stood slowly, no papers in his hand, just certainty. Your Honor, the record already speaks volumes, he said. My client was publicly mocked, financially exploited, and stripped of her privacy by her own son. She responded by exercising her legal rights. And when those rights were enforced, he responded with an appeal grounded in ego, not evidence. He stepped forward just slightly. The cognitive evaluation was conducted by a state-appointed psychologist. The financial records are verified. The theft report is on file with local law enforcement. There is no gray area here, only refusal to accept consequences. The judge tapped his pen twice against the desk. Is there any new evidence, Mr. Price would like the court to consider? Mark opened his mouth, closed it. Silence. The judge didn't even request a recess. Appeal denied, he said flatly. Restraining order remains in full effect. Eleanor let out the smallest breath, barely audible. Sophie, seated beside her, wrapped her arms around her grandmother's shoulders and whispered. It's really over now. Janet leaned in, voice low but smug. He's losing every slice. Back home, Eleanor sat at her desk. The red binder closed now, resting under a brand new folder labeled Final Trust. Daniel had suggested one last update. It's time, he told her after the hearing. Let's go airtight. So she did. They added a reinforced anti-contest clause. If Mark or anyone on his behalf attempted to challenge the trust in any form, he'd forfeit everything, including rights to personal items, sentimental artifacts, and legal standing in the event of her passing. Sophie remained sole beneficiary, with charitable donations locked in for the senior center, literacy fund, and Meals on Wheels program. It wasn't just a will anymore, it was a wall, and Mark wouldn't climb it. The unexpected came days later. A knock on the front door, followed by a soft voice Eleanor almost didn't recognize. Hi, it's me. Claire. She looked worn, her expensive makeup smudged, her eyes ringed in shadows. Her suitcase sat behind her on the porch like a final punctuation mark. I left him, she said. I couldn't live in that house anymore. Not after what he's done. Eleanor didn't invite her in. She didn't slam the door either. She simply stood in the threshold, silent. I know you don't owe me anything, Claire added. But for what it's worth, I never should have backed him. There was no forgiveness in Eleanor's eyes, only clarity. I told him this would blow up, Claire murmured. He wouldn't listen. She stepped back down the stairs, dragging her suitcase behind her, leaving Eleanor standing in the doorway, watching the woman who once stole her pearls, now losing the only thing she had left. The first thing Mark noticed when he walked into the kitchen was the sound, or rather, the lack of it. No heels on tile, no blender humming, no Claire humming off-key to some lifestyle podcast in the background. Just the slow, irregular drip of the leaky faucet Claire had nagged him to fix for months. She was gone. The counters were cleared. The framed wedding photo once perched on the windowsill now sat face down on the dining table, beside an envelope with her initials scrawled in the top corner. She hadn't even written a note inside, just a single sheet listing the items she'd taken. Clothes, photos, jewelry, and my name off the mortgage. The house felt hollow, not just quiet. Vacant. He opened the fridge and stared at a half carton of eggs, 2 expired yogurts, and a bottle of hot sauce. It wasn't just food that had left. It was something deeper, harder to name. Across town, the mood was entirely different. Eleanor's kitchen was warm with the scent of cinnamon toast and fresh coffee. Sophie sat at the dining table, laptop open, highlighter in hand. She wore Eleanor's old college sweatshirt, sleeves too long for her arms, hair twisted into a messy knot, earbuds in but always half listening. Eleanor passed by and gently set a fresh mug of tea beside her. No words were needed. Sophie looked up, smiled, and kept reading. The house didn't just feel alive, it was alive. Eleanor stepped onto the back patio, letting the morning sun hit her face. It was mild out, just a whisper of breeze stirring the potted herbs. Janet sat on the glider bench with her feet up and a crossword book open on her lap. Well, she said without looking up, how's the Queen this morning? Rested, Eleanor replied, taking a seat beside her. Peaceful, Janet grinned. Peace tastes better than cake, huh? Much better. The landline rang inside. Sophie answered, her voice soft at first. Then it shifted. By the time she walked out to the patio, her face had gone pale. It's him, she said. He wants to talk to you. Eleanor took the phone. No rush, no nerves. She just placed it to her ear and waited. Mark's voice was low, broken. You ruined me. She said nothing. I lost everything, Mom. Claire's gone. The house feels like a damn tomb. I'm sleeping in the guest room because I can't look at our bed without hearing her say she should have walked out a year ago. Eleanor looked out at the garden, at the sun catching on the basil leaves. She let him speak. I didn't mean for any of this. I was angry. You embarrassed me. You turned Sophie against me. She finally answered. No, she said, her voice even. You did that yourself. Every withdrawal, every lie, every time you laughed at me like I was a burden. You were chiseling at your own future. I just stopped holding the net underneath you. Mark went quiet. You chose your appetite over your integrity, she added. And now the table's empty. A pause. Then he hung up. She didn't put the receiver down right away. She let the silence hold, let it echo inside her. Back inside, Sophie had returned to her studies. Janet watched from the bench, brow arched. Let me guess, he called for pity, not apology. Eleanor smiled thinly. Correct. The sun climbed higher as the day wore on, casting long shadows across the floorboards. Later that evening, Daniel called. He didn't bother with pleasantries. News just broke, he said. Local outlet ran a story on elder financial abuse cases, yours included, anonymously. But it didn't take long for the dots to connect. I just got confirmation Eleanor waited. Mark's firm terminated him this afternoon. Official statement cited ethical misalignment. It's done. Eleanor didn't speak. She looked over at the dining table, where Sophie sat quietly, still reading, still learning, her seat steady, her future intact. And across town, Mark's chair finally sat as empty as the life he'd built around it. The kitchen filled with the scent of vanilla and cinnamon. The air rich and warm, like a room trying to remember joy. Eleanor cracked the final egg into the bowl, watching the yolk slip into the batter. No boxed mix, no store-bought, shortcuts. This cake was hers, start to finish. Janet stood at the sink peeling apples for a side tart, humming a Patsy Cline tune that had no business sounding as sweet as it did. I can't believe you're doing this again, she said. After what happened last time. Eleanor whisked the batter with smooth, steady strokes. That wasn't a birthday. That was a performance. This time, we're actually celebrating. Sophie peeked around the doorframe, her cheeks flushed from setting the back patio table. She wore a paper crown she'd folded from leftover wrapping paper, tilted slightly to the left like a secret joke. We good to light candles soon, she asked. Give the frosting 5 minutes to settle, Eleanor said. Out back, the late afternoon sun painted the sky with streaks of gold and tangerine. The table was simple, a gingham cloth, 3 mismatched chairs, and a vase of garden-picked flowers. Eleanor had baked the cake in her mother's old ceramic pan, vanilla bean with a touch of almond, finished with whipped buttercream and a dusting of cinnamon. She carried it outside slowly, holding it with the same reverence she once had for school science projects and newborns. Sophie gasped softly. Janet clapped. Now that, Janet said, is a damn proper cake. They sang, quietly, off-key, with laughter between the lines. And then Eleanor cut 3 generous slices. No jokes, no passive-aggressive remarks, no filtered photos being posted behind her back. Just cake. Sophie took her first bite and closed her eyes like it might disappear if she didn't savor it right. This, she said, mouth full. This is how it should have been. Eleanor looked at her, really looked, at the young woman who had stood by her side when no one else did, who bore witness when others chose to turn away. Only people who respect you, Eleanor said gently. Get cake. Janet raised her fork. To earn slices. They ate under the open sky, bees buzzing near the rose bushes, wind nudging the napkins. No fanfare, just warmth. After dessert, they sat quietly as Daniel arrived. He wore jeans and a dress shirt, sleeves rolled up, a leather folder tucked under one arm. All final, he said, tapping the folder on the table. Eleanor took it with a nod. Thank you for helping me build something that can't be undone. Daniel smiled. You did that. I just made it legal. The folder contained every document. Revoked wills, updated trusts, notarized donations, and legal locks Mark would never pick. Sophie's name stood alone on the line that mattered most. The wind shifted as the sun dipped lower. They began to gather the plates and fold the napkins when the mail carrier passed the gate and tucked something into the box. Sophie went to fetch it. She returned with a single envelope, cream-colored, thick, with handwriting Eleanor hadn't seen in months. Neat but a little hurried, as if the writer wasn't sure if he'd finish before losing the nerve. Grandma, Sophie said carefully, it's from Dad. Eleanor wiped her hands on a dish towel. Her fingers hovered over the flap, but she didn't open it. Not yet. Janet glanced at it, then at Eleanor. You want me to burn it for you? No, Eleanor said quietly. Let's see what a man says when the cake's no longer his to cut. The letter sat on Eleanor's nightstand, like a confession waiting for judgment. She hadn't touched it again since that night on the patio, hadn't unfolded it or reread the lines scrawled in Mark's once careless handwriting. But this morning she was ready. She poured herself a mug of coffee, no cream, just strong and black, and opened the curtains wide. Stockton's light spilled across the room, dusting everything in gold. Then she sat down, opened the envelope again, and read the words without flinching. I know I went too far. I know I lost you. He wrote of guilt, but not understanding. He recounted memories, but only the ones that served him. His words smelled of desperation, not remorse. There were apologies, but each came wrapped in excuses. I didn't think you'd follow through. I didn't think you'd actually cut me off. Claire pushed me, but I let her. I was trying to hold everything together. You made it worse when you turned Sophie against me. Eleanor exhaled through her nose, slow and cool. There it was again, his pattern, now written in ink. Victimhood dressed in apology. She had taught hundreds of students how to read between the lines. She recognized deflection when she saw it. At the bottom of the page, the final plea, I miss my mom. Can I come home? She folded the letter back up, once, twice, then walked it across the hall and opened the second drawer of her filing cabinet. Inside sat a blue folder marked with a label Sophie had printed for her months ago. Done. She slid the letter inside, between the guardianship rejection and the pawnshop return slip. Then she closed the drawer with a soft click. In the dining room, Sophie sat cross-legged on the floor, reorganizing Eleanor's book donations for the community literacy drive. Titles were sorted by genre, neat stacks forming like small towers of wisdom. You all right? Sophie asked without looking up. I'm good, Eleanor replied. Janet arrived half an hour later, toting a tote bag full of bookmarks, stickers, and donation receipts from the local library board. They loved your idea, she said, dropping into a chair. The reading room's getting your name over the archway. Eleanor Price Literacy Center. Has a nice ring, huh? Eleanor handed her a fresh copy of her will, already signed, witnessed, and notarized. Janet blinked. You rewrote it again? Final pass, Eleanor said. Mark is out. Sophie stays sole heir, and I added 2 new clauses. Janet flipped to the end and grinned. 10% to the Stockton Literacy Foundation, and 5% to the local food co-op's kids program. You're frosting the cake now. Eleanor gave a soft smile. I spent my life feeding minds. Might as well keep doing it long after I'm gone. Janet's tone softened. You sure about this? Not even a sliver for him? I gave him every chance, Eleanor said. He handed back only excuses. Sophie looked up from the book pile. You're not wrong. He didn't come for you. He came to fix how he looked. Eleanor nodded once, grateful but heavy. I needed the letter, not to forgive him, to prove he never really saw me. Sophie stood and crossed the room, wrapping her arms around Eleanor's shoulders. I won't let anyone hurt you again, she whispered. That evening, the local paper was delivered late, folded neatly on the porch like it was saving its strength for something worth carrying. Eleanor opened it while standing at the sink, her tea cooling beside her. Page B3, lower right corner, ran a headline boxed in thin lines. Retired teacher leaves. Legacy beyond family feuds. After a widely watched legal dispute involving financial elder abuse, former educator Eleanor Price donates major portions of her estate to support community literacy and youth programs. I taught children to read, Price said. Now I'm teaching them what dignity looks like. Eleanor folded the paper in half and set it next to her framed photo of Sophie in kindergarten, toothless grin and construction paper crown. She didn't smile, she didn't cry, but she felt it. A kind of stillness that tasted finely like peace. And the story wasn't over. Not until the very last slice was kept. The ribbon was red, thick, and looped like a bow on the kind of gift no one expected to receive. Eleanor stood near the entrance of the newly renovated library wing, her palms folded neatly over each other, a soft breeze nudging the hem of her skirt. The smell of old paper blended with fresh paint, lemon wax, and childhood hope. It was warm and Stockton that morning, but the cool air wafting from the glass doors made her feel sharp, fully present. To her left, a podium. To her right, the bold black lettering just mounted on the wall, the Eleanor Price Literacy Wing. To every child who needed one more chapter, Sophie had chosen the quote, quietly, without fanfare. It had come from something Eleanor once said in passing after story time at the library when Sophie was 6. If a child asks for one more chapter, you give it, because not every child gets asked twice. She hadn't even remembered saying it, but Sophie had. Rows of folding chairs lined the sidewalk. They were filled with librarians, city officials, students from the local high school, and a few reporters jotting notes between sips of lukewarm coffee. But Eleanor's eyes stayed fixed on 2 people. Daniel stood near the edge of the gathering, dressed in a pale gray suit, a legal pad tucked under one arm. He gave her a single nod from across the courtyard, small, discreet, and entirely meaningful. Next to him stood Janet, wearing an oversized sun hat that made her look like she was hiding from the press, despite being the most photogenic person there. She held a bouquet of yellow tulips wrapped in brown paper, her lips already curled in a smirk before she even stepped forward. "These are for you," Janet whispered, handing the flowers over. "From the co-op board. And me, but mostly me." Eleanor took them carefully. "Thank you. I figured you already had your name on a building. Might as well get some color to go with it." The mayor gave a brief speech, full of platitudes and recycled phrases about community champions and generational investment. Eleanor didn't listen closely. Her ears were tuned to Sophie, who now stepped up to the mic. Sophie cleared her throat, clutching her folded note cards with both hands. "My grandmother taught for over 30 years. She taught language, yes, but also fairness. And boundaries? She taught her students to speak up. And in the past year, she taught me to do the same. She's why I read, why I ask questions, why I believe you can survive anything if you remember who you are." Sophie's voice caught just once before she powered through. She gave me her stories so I could write my own. There was a silence afterward that felt sacred, not performative, not polite, real. When the applause finally broke it, Eleanor blinked down at the flowers in her hands, surprised to find her grip had tightened. Back inside, after the ceremony, Daniel found her near the refreshment table and handed her a slim file folder. "This," he said, tapping the cover, "is the final record. Your estate is airtight. Every transfer is protected, every clause enforceable. Not even a whiff of challenge can pass through it. Good, Eleanor said, her voice cool and deliberate. Because I'm done writing edits. You built more than protection, he said. You built permanence. She offered a thin smile. Every slice accounted for. Janet raised a plastic cup of punch. To legacies better than sheet cake. Everyone laughed, but Eleanor's thoughts drifted elsewhere. Later that evening, once the house had emptied and the sky had turned the color of cooling ash, Eleanor moved slowly through her kitchen. She opened the freezer to grab ice for her tea until her eyes landed on something tucked behind a box of frozen berries. A flash of foil. She reached in slowly and pulled it free, the slice, still wrapped in the same foil, still marked in her tidy handwriting. August 25th, birthday. Insult. She turned it over once in her hands. Cold, forgotten, preserved. And yet, not quite done. The foil was stiff from the cold, its edges slightly curled, like it had been waiting, silently, stubbornly, at the back of the freezer for its cue. Eleanor turned it over in her hands. The ink on the label faded, but still legible. August 25th, birthday. Insult. She didn't hesitate this time. She peeled the foil back slowly, layer by layer, revealing the time-worn slice of chocolate cake. Frosting had gone dull. The sponge, once moist, now looked dry and dense, its richness long since stolen by freezer burn. Still, it held shape, held memory, held weight. She set it on the kitchen counter next to a new cake, a fresh vanilla loaf with lemon glaze, still warm from the oven, its sweet scent wafting up in soft waves. A contrast in color and texture, the old and the new. One was stale spite, the other soft reclamation. Eleanor stood back, arms folded, letting the meaning settle over her. Sophie wandered in, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her hair damp from a late shower. She paused when she saw both cakes side by side. "That's the one, isn't it?" she asked. Eleanor nodded once. "The slice I didn't eat." Sophie stepped closer, studying the preserved piece. "Why'd you keep it all this time?" Eleanor didn't answer right away. She ran a finger lightly along the edge of the ceramic plate beneath the fresh loaf, then turned toward her granddaughter. "Because it reminds me," she said quietly, "what it feels like when someone tries to shrink you down. One joke, one slice at a time." Sophie sat at the table, elbows on the wood, watching her. "I thought maybe it was bitterness," Eleanor continued. "But I think it was something else, something stronger." "Like what?" Eleanor smiled faintly. "A reminder. Never let them cut you small." Just then, Janet appeared in the doorway, arms full, blankets, a paperback novel, and a container of cold pasta salad. She paused at the sight of the cake lineup. "Well, if that's not a before and after for the soul," she said. Eleanor motioned to the fresh cake. "I figured today was the right day to share the good one." "What's the occasion?" Eleanor met her eyes. "Freedom." Janet nodded approvingly. "Best kind of celebration." They sliced into the warm loaf together, steam curling upward, lemon sugar cracking under the knife. Each woman took a piece and sat down at the table, the window behind them casting late sunlight across their plates. They ate slowly, not because they had to savor it, but because they could. Sophie leaned forward. "Do you think he meant the apology?" Eleanor didn't answer right away. She took a sip of tea, then looked across the table with a steady gaze. "I think he missed the version of me who didn't fight back." Silence settled, comfortable, solid. After they finished, Eleanor stood and crossed the room to a drawer she rarely opened. From inside, she retrieved a small picture frame, plain walnut, old but polished. She placed it on the counter, removed the backing, and slid in a new photo. It was from the library opening, Sophie at the podium, Janet to her left, both of them laughing, heads tilted toward one another in a moment Eleanor hadn't noticed being captured. She set the frame beside the new cake. Behind it, she placed the old slice on a clean ceramic dish and covered it with a glass dome. Not to eat, not to display, but to mark, a reminder of the day she was made small and the life she chose to build taller anyway. As evening dimmed the room, Sophie rose to rinse the plates. Janet slipped off her shoes, and Eleanor stood quietly with her back to the window, watching the shadows lengthen across the tiled floor. She reached out and ran her fingers over the dome one last time. Softly, almost to herself, she said, "At my birthday dinner, my son said, 'Don't waste cake on her,' so I cut him out of every slice of my will.